Hello, everybody. It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome. Welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical. And if you're watching and it happens to be a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. So myself and Andy are back for another Ultimate Journey episode. Andy, I'm hoping that you're excited for this one.
You know, I always am. This is so much fun.
I'm glad you're having a good time. And I'm hoping that everybody out there, you guys are having a good time as well. It's a playlist in the box below, so feel free to catch up. Now is a good time to, because there hasn't really been too much progress as of yet. But if you go back, if you give it about a year, you're going to have a little bit of catching up to do. So now is the time to really dive in and join us for the Ultimate Journey. So, of course, just for everybody who is new watching, welcome. Ultimate Journey, we're doing two different ones. We're doing a major Ultimate Journey over for DC Comics and over for Marvel. Tonight is DC's night. We've done a lot of talking, Andy and myself, and we have done our research. We've consulted with other comic book fans talking about what is the best story in comics regarding these big two companies. And when it comes to DC, we decided that it most likely is Geoff Johns' Blackest Night. So we've been doing our road to Blackest Night. We have taken on some of the most well-known and most iconic DC stories to date, and we're tackling another one that a lot of people sort of kind of forget to a certain degree. But I'm actually glad that we're doing this specific story now because it also happens to be the 30th anniversary of this specific story. And that, of course, is the second Crisis story that DC Comics gave us. And that was Zero Hour, Crisis in Time. There's a reason why you can't see much on this cover. But, you know, Andy, I got to be honest with you. When you take a look at who did the very first Crisis story back in 1985, the great Marv Wolfman and the late, great George Perez, if this was supposed to be, quote unquote, a spiritual sequel for Crisis on Infinite Earths, because a lot of Crisis on Infinite Earth is referenced in Zero Hour Crisis in
Mhm.
Time, you couldn't have asked for a better pairing than Dan Jurgens and Jerry Ordway, especially in the year of 1994. They had just come off of The Death of Superman and Reign of the Supermen, a story as a whole that shook the world of comics for what it was at the time. And then they go on to tackle another big project, because in the world of DC, when you hear that word crisis, you know that some you know what is about to hit the fan.
No, this was the peak time for them. And if you're talking about getting titans of the moment to do something, Dan Jurgens in particular, when I think of that era of DC, like, and I think I've even heard you say it before, like it's the Dan Jurgens Superman and Justice League that you think, like, that's your conception of the characters, really. So this is an important book. I'm really glad to have read this. I don't know if I've told you before. This is the first time I'm
You
reading this
did.
story.
You
Yeah, okay,
did.
okay, okay. So
That's
it
one
was
of
my
the few
first time
reasons why
reading it.
I'm glad that we're doing these two Ultimate Journeys for DC and Marvel, because you are just as knowledgeable and well versed in comics as I am. But it's always nice to know that there are things out there that we both had not read or had been wanting to read for so many
Yeah,
years. I mean, I got to be honest with you, now that we're celebrating the 85th anniversary of Batman, I read a couple of Batman stories that I had never read before. So I'm
yeah,
so glad that I got the opportunity to finally read them, because I knew they were out there. I knew they existed. So the fact that you are experiencing this crisis story for the first time, it's just, I'm thinking it's just making your feelings as a comic book aficionado a little bit more complete.
yes, yeah. No, this is the kind of this journey is sort of a blind spot for me. I feel, and look, we're taking the scenic route to Blackest Night, right? But at the same time, I feel like I'm filling in a big gap that I've always had with Green Lantern, not getting as much of my focus as he has deserved. Um, and I know that this story is universe wide, right? So I'm not going to reduce this to a Green Lantern story. Um, I think it's at this moment I should let you know and let the audience know broad strokes. On the whole, I actually really didn't like this that much. And I should let you know that from the jump. But what I will say is I loved the ending,
Mm.
and basically that final issue. Like when I look back on it, and we'll talk about the whole thing, so I'm not going to go into detail now, but like when I look back on my experience of having read this, I am mostly going to be thinking about that final issue as like what is essentially worth the price of admission. I read the whole book thinking this is one of those like universe altering crossover stories that like is just kind of not doing all that much for me. And then it got good. So when I didn't really enjoy my experience of reading it until I did. And unlike Crisis on Infinite Earths, I don't think this is going to be one that like I point new readers to as like, oh man, you got to read. Like, but like I'm still very happy for having read it. And I will tell you that even though we are definitely taking the scenic route to Blackest Night, that final issue, if I were giving someone like the direct express route to Blackest Night, I would include just that issue. So you got to read it though. You like have to read it.
Yes, and I'm not going to disagree with you wholeheartedly on this. I mean, I definitely feel that this story is far from perfect. But again, you know, as somebody who always knew that Blackest Night, because again, you know, I always feel like I have to say this just because you never know who's watching, but you know, I stopped reading comic books in 1996, 97. I think Kingdom Come, when I was in high school, was the last major comic story that I read. What a great way to take a little bit of a break, you know? But when I got back into comics, I had been already, you know, preparing myself, like knowing what was out there and what I knew I needed to read. And I knew that
Yeah.
Blackest Night was on my list.
Yeah.
But after getting to 2019 and starting to dive back into comics and starting to read Blackest Night, knowing that there was so much more meat and so much more of a history to this story, because to read Blackest Night on its own is a treat. It's
Yeah.
a damn good treat.
Yeah.
But, you know, I am one of those types of people that wants to know, you know, how did we get from point A to point B? And then the big question is, how far am I going to go down this rabbit hole? At the same time, I also feel that this story is definitely an integral piece for people who want to be crisis completionists, because this is definitely one of those important stories. And I will definitely say that Dan Jurgens and Jerry Ward Wade did their absolute best to really turn this into something landmark and something special. And again,
And it is.
yes, and
Just
for
to say,
me,
I think it is a really special series. You
but
know, like
but
maybe I didn't get the same enjoyment, but like you're
but at
right.
the end of the day, what you and I are going to agree on is how important this story is to getting to Blackest Night.
Yes, it's not just that last issue, too. And like, here's the thing: people are going to hear us now talk about it, and even my opinion will evolve on it as it always does whenever I chat about stuff. But like, there are moments throughout that are incredibly major that not only matter to Blackest Night, but are like intensely important to the DC universe from this point on. By the way, I'll take my own little segue just because you say, you know, not knowing who's watching. Like, I have I have a different kind of gap in comics from Steve. They were always a part of the fabric of my life and growing up. Somewhere around high school, I kind of fell out of comics a little bit, but in college, got back into it, reading a lot of great stories from the past, ones that I had missed and weren't really part of my fabric. Even though I've been going to Comic-Con for like years, even through that, because there's so much else. I was just there. Actually, I got Long Halloween while I was
Oh,
there because
nice.
I've never had a copy. Oh wait, no, this isn't my, this is Steve's, because it says to Steve Happy Halloween from Jeff Loeb in it. So I guess I got this not for me. This is for you from
What?
Comic-Con, Steve. But I thought I would have a little bit of fun surprising you with that in the middle of our episode. But
Holy cow. Thank
but
you.
yeah. So we'll take a break for a second to nerd out over that. Yeah, I've been dying to tell you I got that for you at Comic.
Wow. How much do I owe you?
You don't. It's a gift.
Oh, so
But
there. Okay, so you know what?
I
Don't feel
got to
so
meet Jeff
guilty.
Loeb.
Well, that's
So like
awesome. I mean, considering the fact that he's coming back to Batman this in 2025, holy
he
cow.
was he was wearing a Hush 2 shirt when I when I met him. Um, yeah, so yeah,
Wow, thanks,
that's
man.
a
That's
little fun
amazing.
since you couldn't join me, Steve. That's a little bit of fun for you. But also there's truth to what I let in with there. Like I did get back into comics in college and pick up on these great stories. So it's really great to start to fill in my blind spots. But yeah, for our viewers, that was mostly a little bit of fun I wanted to have with Steve right there. Um,
That's you're too kind.
I knew you'd love it.
So the a couple of other things that we definitely need to touch upon before we get into Zero Hour. There definitely are a couple of additional things that you can read, because one of the few things that we do on the Ultimate Journey here is when we get to the next step on our journey, we want to let people know about, what you could read in between these two major stories and what you could possibly read in terms of tie-ins, because there do happen to be a lot of tie-ins to Zero Hour. One of the few things that I would definitely recommend to the audience out there, and I know, Andy, that you did that, because the last thing that we discussed was Emerald Twilight, which concluded with the introduction of Kyle Rayner. One of the most important pieces of the road to Blackest Night is the development of Kyle Rayner as Green Lantern. And the first story arc in the Green Lantern comic books by Ron Mars goes right in to Zero Hour. So I think it's like issues 52 to 56, I think. I mean, I even think that there is one book in that story arc that is actually part of the Zero Hour connected story where Kyle meets Alan Scott for the
Yeah,
first time,
and
which is a great
I
issue,
did
by the
read
way.
that arc. Yeah, I did read, and I think I had mentioned that when we spoke about Emerald Twilight
So
that I had.
if you so you've read it,
Yeah, so
so
I
you're
did.
never gonna look at refrigerators the same way again.
Never, but like, but I did like, I think I mentioned it on our Emerald Twilight episode. I just kept going because I really meant what I said. This is really filling in a lot of Green Lantern blind spots for me. And I was just enjoying myself so much. I thought Emerald Twilight was wonderful and
It is a great
moving.
story.
And my favorite parts of Zero Hour are the ones that feel the most
Connected?
emotionally connected to Emerald Twilight. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And to Green Lantern. So it's obvious why this is a natural story to be checking out on a road to Blackest Night. So while I say we're taking the scenic route there, there's some intensely important stuff
And some of the other
in this book.
things that do have that I would definitely recommend to people is you don't necessarily have to read them as part of Crisis in Time, but also during this point, there were some incredible creative minds working on the main issues and series of DC at that time. So I would highly recommend some of the Zero issues. If you've never read Flash on its own or Aquaman on its own, this is when Peter David was writing Aquaman and Mark Waid was writing The Flash. Their Zero issues were great jumping on points if you really want to read some excellent, excellent stories. And for many people who know that Aquaman can be somewhat of a joke or a laughing stock to people who are not truly vested in comics but know Aquaman from popular culture, Peter David turned Aquaman into such a serious book and turned this guy into a badass, because this is the guy that decided to have Aquaman lose his hand and then put a harpoon hook on that stump in replacement, ditch the orange and green suit completely, let the guy grow out his hair and look like one badass version of Kurt Cobain who could talk to fish, and like really give you a great, great character. So those Zero issues, I would personally recommend Mark Waid's Flash Zero and Peter David's Aquaman Zero, because they just lead into some really great stories featuring those two characters.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And definitely important to this book. And where do you want to start, Steve? Where do you want to actually talk about the story at hand?
So basically, the best way to start about is actually going to link into something that we recently recorded regarding Batman. We went The Killing Joke, and in the very beginning of this story, Batgirl shows up, helping the Bat family take on a couple of criminals. And all of a sudden, I believe it's Nightwing who says, Barbara, how are you walking again? And then we discover that something's not right because this version of Batgirl is not their Batgirl. It's a Batgirl from a different universe. And this is when the great minds of the Justice League suddenly have to start coming together and saying, what's going on here? I thought that this was dealt with.
And I'll jump in and actually just say to get any negativity out of the way that I might have quickly. When I say that I didn't really actually love this story up until the end, which was really, really fun and really good, a big part of it is I have a lot of like personal hangups with time stories. And a lot of that comes from I'm a fantasy and sci-fi guy. I'm a comic guy. I love my games. I love my movies. I love my comics, all of that. I'm really good with suspension of disbelief. There's something about timeline stories that always like kind of take me out of it because I have difficulty when I sense a conflict of internal logic, kind of. And so, kind of the way that we go free flowing between calling something a dimension, calling something a timeline, calling something past, calling something a universe, blah, 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 it gets very kind of jargon to me and takes me out of the story. So, stories like that are really, really hard for me to just enjoy. I try to turn it off and be like, it doesn't make sense, blah blah blah, like, but it's in service of the story. But with timeline related stuff, I have such a difficult time with it. So that's my hang up. So I say this for both you, Steve, and anyone watching this to know, if you don't have this hang up that I just described, you'll enjoy this story so much more than me. And that's a preference thing, not a judgment thing. So
You
just
see, I
so we
gotta be
get that
honest,
out of the way.
and I gotta be honest with you, I'm exactly the opposite because you do know what my favorite movie of all time is, right?
I guess I guess I don't, because it must be related to what we're talking about right
It's
now.
Back to the Future.
Back to the well, okay.
And my
Back to the
favorite
Future
and
doesn't
my
even bother me
favorite
because
Back
it's
to the
got
Future
internal logic.
movie,
Like
and my favorite Back to
it,
the Future movie is part two
part
because I
two.
love the idea of alternate timelines. It's just
Yeah.
so fascinating to me because
Yeah.
we talked about alternate timelines, and remember I told you about my friend Gary where he said, like, in a world where alternate universes are possible and there are various versions of me throughout these time streams and whatnot, there is definitely an alternate world where I am in fact a rodeo clown.
Yeah.
So I love the idea of the fact that a concept like this is very much possible
Mhm.
because when you get to a crossroads, you have to go in one direction. You can't, especially when it comes to a monumental decision making process, you can't have your cake and eat it too. So
Mhm.
you're going to unfortunately have to choose a path, but you're always going to wonder, what is life going to be like if I took that other route? Like, it can be something so complex, or it could be a simple thing. Like last Thursday, my wife and I went to Woodbury Commons and we went to a lot of the outlet stores and we bought a lot of stuff. I went to the Columbia Sportswear store to get myself a windbreaker jacket. And there were these very comfortable long sleeved shirts for $14. Like, I felt them. I felt like I could just put one on and just like lounge on my couch for the entire day and just just veg. And I didn't buy it. And just the other day, I was so hung up on, like, I really should have bought that shirt.
Oh
So it
man,
could be
I'm
something
so
so
sorry.
complex or so stupidly simple like that.
Audience, audience, I'm so sorry. We live in the timeline where Steve manages to freeze to death. Had he only bought his warm shirt and we were in that timeline, we'd
But
be so
but you
much
get my
better off.
point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But
So
anyway,
so yeah.
that's why I mean to say, like, if you don't have this hang up that I have, you will likely enjoy this story better than I do. So this is not even me trash talking the story. It's just kind of explaining why it's not the one for me, but it's also kind of explaining why I liked it so much come the end because I was able to hook on to more of an emotional context to the story versus a like big budget action movie
So
angle
yeah,
into the
so there's
story.
a lot of very
Yeah.
interesting events that take place right when this Batgirl is discovered, and one of them is actually when Kyle Rayner is actually standing amongst the heroes, and he's just like awestruck. And some of the faces that he sees, it's like the last time, and they even say this in the book, it's like the last time that we all got together in a room like this was during the time that the Monitor called us all up to his watchtower to stop these waves from killing other universes.
Mhm.
So it was definitely an emotional moment for a lot of these heroes. And then there was an event that takes place that is even more, I don't know what the right way to describe my emotions, but long and the short of it is all of a sudden Wally West, the Flash, ends up disintegrating during an event that he has to take place in. And like, you want to know what's so funny? Remember when we talked about this one during the original story, how we felt that Barry Allen's vanishing wasn't, or death wasn't so climactic, and yet this event takes place right in the beginning of the book, and that's actually a little bit earth shattering because it's just like, again?
Well, it
Why?
wouldn't be a crisis if we didn't kill Flash. Apparently,
Why?
it's what you got to do.
But the other thing that I completely forgot to mention is I know that there are certain points in this book that can be absolutely confusing. And one of the ways that it could be even more confusing is the reading order. You also have to remember that this book goes backwards. It starts with issue 4, and then it goes to issue 0. I should have said this earlier. I apologize. But that is a very important thing to know.
If you're reading it in a collected edition, obviously this is done for you. You don't have to worry about it. But if you're hunting for the original floppies or something, just be aware you need to go in reverse order.
It's an effortless hunt, by the way. I got my set for $11. It
Yeah,
really wasn't
yeah.
hard to find. But they're talking about this, and there are other points during the times in the time stream where other parties are involved with this whole phenomenon, because we're introduced to the timekeepers, and I
Mm-hmm,
believe Rip Hunter is in the group as he normally is, and
mm-hmm,
they're talking about the fact that something happened in the end of time and at the beginning of time, and it's causing the time stream to virtually collapse around everything. And so it's just, I don't know whether the stakes are as high as they were on Crisis on Infinite Earths, but there's something about the collapsing of time that seems to me personally a little more dire.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because when you think about Crisis on Infinite Earths, you do your best to save the other Earths, but at the end of the day, what do you really want to do? You want to save your own world, your own Earth, your own universe. Time stream affects all.
Mm-hmm.
So unless you all do something, you're royally screwed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, obviously, it's another like universe altering kind of high stakes. The thing I go to is it feels like a big budget action film, like the big. This is the Avengers movie before the Avengers movie, right? Like this is your ultimate crossover. The future of everything, the past of everything is at stake.
It's the 90s
So
also, so everything's extreme.
everything's extreme,
Because of the
extreme,
fact that
yes.
we also have to remember that Image Comics had just came onto the scene, and DC and Marvel are like scrambling to get things on the shelves that will sell.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, this is certainly a big story. Certainly a big story to try to do it.
and
Yeah.
and there are so many other things that happen throughout the first couple of issues that just get so bizarre, like that
We see young
scene.
Hal Jordan in the first issue, or it's the
We
same
see
issue
young
that,
Hal Jordan in the future,
right.
and everybody is talking about the fact that Hal Jordan just literally died.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the other big thing is where all of a sudden there are like 15 to 20 different versions of Hawkman in
Hawkman.
one place. And like everybody's like completely dumbfounded and can't even figure out what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's in
And
there too. I'm flipping through kind of mine to pick out like any of my most notable things. I think we make our first outreach to Spectre early on around this time too, who ends up being a key player in this story and
a much
our
bigger
journey as
key than he
well.
did in Crisis, actually, in the original.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what I think of as our big early story beats, and also
Mhm.
the outreach to the JSA.
That was what
And
I
the
was just
JSA,
about to say, because what I really think one of my favorite parts about this book is the fact that the JSA has such a big role to play,
yeah,
because when the crisis on Infinite Earths was officially averted and there was now officially one world, one universe, the JSA were given a real gift, and they were
mhm,
given the gift to still be young and still manage to fight another day as the JSA.
mhm.
And I also feel that when we think about the road to Blackest Night, I feel that a young Geoff Johns was reading this, saying to himself one day, I'm going to write
Gonna
JSA and
write
I'm going to write some
JSA.
amazing
Yeah,
stories, because
that's that's what I thought when reading this like iteration of the JSA. I strongly felt. Grant, I mean, we knew that this was a major piece of Blackest Night from like plot elements in it, but just you can tell that Geoff Johns cares about this book based on his career trajectory from what you see gets focus in Zero Hour. So yeah, I would say that just the characterization of JSA is really important in this story. Obviously, the outcome for them and their role to play is important too, just kind of plot wise. But I would say that as people are going on this journey with us, just pay attention to the JSA when they pop up because Geoff Johns likes them. Yeah, I mean, honestly, like it's kind of important to be aware of that. I think the same way he clearly is a fan of Green Lantern, he's just a fan of the JSA,
and they're
and he
such great
tries to leverage
characters.
them where he can. Yes,
I mean, it's also just
yes,
because of
with
the
good
fact
reason.
that when you take a look at comics history, you think about the golden age of superheroes, you don't necessarily always think of the work of Gardner Fox.
Hmm.
You don't think of Jay Garrick, you don't think of Alan Scott, because
Yeah,
like when you hear the names Green Lantern, The Flash, Alan Scott is not the first name that comes to mind. Jay Garrick is not the first name that comes to mind. You don't think of these
hmm,
golden age heroes. You don't think of the original heroes like the original Sandman. You don't think of Atom Smasher. You don't think of these guys. You don't think of
right.
Dr. Midnight. You don't think of Hourman. And so to get these characters in this book to show a whole new generation that there were heroes
Hmm.
outside of the Holy Trinity before the Silver Age, I want you to meet them because I think you're
Yeah.
going to love them.
Hmm. Hmm. No, it's an important element of the story, and making us care about them in a relatively short period of time to people who are only reading like this contained story, to gain interest in them. I think it's just an important part of the story. So I'm glad we take a second to
Absolutely.
just kind of
And it's also
focus
because
on
of the
them.
fact that they are pretty much the ones that go toe to toe truly with the antagonist. And
Hmm.
we are introduced to the antagonist, I think, in the second issue of the story. And it's this character
Yes.
named Extant.
Hmm.
And he
Hmm.
basically, I gotta say that it's a forgettable villain in
Yeah.
terms of his name and his characteristics. But there's one thing that I absolutely loved about this character. This character is classic Silver Age super villainy. Like
Yeah.
I personally have a
Yeah.
soft spot for that cartoonish, fiddling with their mustache, talking about
Yeah.
how I am the greatest, I'm going to take over the world, the one that captures the hero and then walks around in circles and gives the monologue and talks about his evil plans. I have a soft spot for classic campy supervillainy. I love it because it's
Yeah.
fantasy. It's enjoyable. So
Yeah.
I will always remember Extant for that part of his personality.
Sure. I'll say that to the extent he matters in this story, I think any of our viewers who are with me and being fans of Japanese role-playing games will get what I mean when I say this is the epitome of a boss switch in this story. So like, yeah, he extant matters and is around, and the heroes are after him, all of that, but like the real villain of this story matters a whole lot more. We don't get to it until the 11th hour, and sometimes we might feel a little bit like, wait, we kind of would like more of that. But the thing is, we have had our true villain, characterized ad nauseum before this, so we
Yeah,
already have history with them. So it doesn't
yeah.
matter as much. But yeah, extant is for my JRPG fans is a boss switch in comic books,
And
and I'm fine with it. That's how it
he
works.
basically gives his purpose for doing what he's doing. He basically is saying that he wants to remake the time stream for his personal benefits. And
Yeah.
I think what's so funny about this whole thing, because this goes on for about 2 or 3 issues, and the Justice Society and a couple of the other heroes, they're going toe to toe with Extant, and they're basically trying to beat him. You get this very emotional moment in the climax of the fight where Extant takes the youth away from the Justice Society,
Hmm.
and some of the Justice Society actually dies. And it is so upsetting when Alan Scott and Jay Garrick basically rips the lightning bolt stitches off of his costume and says, I don't want to be the Flash
Done.
anymore if this is what's going to happen to me. The fact that Alan Scott takes his ring off and he gives it to Kyle Rayner and says, you are now responsible for the ultimate Green Lantern power. It's sort of a really emotional moment of passing the torch to the newer heroes, but at the same time you feel so bad because you love these characters, and you just, even if you've never met them before, you truly get to love them so
You do.
quickly, and you
You do.
really don't want them to go so soon.
It's the emotional climax before the emotional climax. Seeing them shirk the mantle, in response to how badly their comrades have been beaten down and in some cases killed. And I think you're exactly right, Steve. Even if you don't have a history with these characters, it is a point that pulls you in, that makes you think, wait, I'm feeling something here. And then it pulls off you wanting to learn more about them, right? Which Geoff Johns is happy to do for you.
Oh
But
yes.
yeah, it is. I will say, if I'm thinking about uh, the biggest moments in the story for me that are not the climax and the bitter end, I think of what we have discussed thus far. I think of Flash, well, more than one Flash, and Alan Scott, is what I think about. Yeah.
Yeah. So I might be entirely wrong like this, because for some strange reason I might be drawing a blank. Because if there's one thing that I definitely know, is that Extant is basically doing what he's doing and saying what he's saying, and I think it's Batman, because I always feel it always is Batman. He's not buying it. He
Yeah.
knows that there's someone else out there, and that Extent is not the true villain in
Yeah.
this story. And
Yeah.
I believe the Spectre definitely sees it too.
Yeah.
And of course, we get to the very end where we actually hear Extant basically getting upset because he was promised glory and greatness, and he's basically going to be ending up walking away with nothing. And that is when we realize that Extant was not the person that was destroying the time stream.
Yeah.
And then we get the reason why this is such a crucial story on the road to Blackest Night. Because the villain, or the person who is at the crux of this issue, is none other than Hal Jordan himself. who was thought to have been dead, but he's not dead. And he's officially mad. He is
Yeah.
now officially Parallax. He is now the encompassing ultimate power after everything that he has done in Emerald Twilight. And he goes back to what he was doing right before Emerald Twilight began in Green Lantern issue 46. I really hope I said that right. Basically saying, I want to remake the time stream because I lost everything. And you are not going to stop me. I am going to have my city, my family. I'm getting them all back. And I'm going to tear apart reality to do it.
And here's where I say, I said I didn't enjoy this story as a whole, but why it comes together for me at the end here, and I love it so much. Um, so I loved Emerald Twilight, right?
Yes.
I did. We talked about that. I loved it. It's really impactful. There was part of me though, and we talked about this reading Emerald Twilight, that since it was so short, really, Hal's fall from grace did strike me as very jarring. And to a certain extent, like the weakest part of Emerald Twilight to me is it sort of ends with Hal's a villain now, shrug. It kind of, right? But what this does is this makes me feel like I'm really seeing Hal Jordan I know, doing something maybe wrong, but for right reasons, and understanding why he does it and where he comes from. And I think that's the brilliance of it. It's like you said, Steve, we go back to where we found him at the beginning of Emerald Twilight, thinking, why don't I use my powers to recreate the city, to recreate my family, to bring all of this back? But now he's gone back to, he's like, I was right, but I wasn't right enough. I actually need to remake everything because there's so much sadness, and I have the power to correct it. I have the power to make everyone happy. And I think it's difficult to see him as entirely wrong, um in where he is in this story, because he does want to create he wants to create realities for everyone and give everyone something.
Sounds
But
like
then
a
you can,
certain story on the other side of the coin that we read.
doesn't it? Doesn't it
Yeah.
though? Yeah, you can kind of see the parallels. But I think that and you fall into the same trap, right? And it's like, is it real reality? Does it hurt? There's a reality that's wrong that has to exist alongside yours. It's like the our heroes are not going to accept that the villains get these realities where they're happy, because like it's a world where they rule everything, and all good has been squashed out. And it's like you you like can follow Hal to a certain extent, where he's like, I'm gonna remake everything everyone's way for everyone. And then you kind of understand things like Batgirl, who's like, I'm gonna fight to continue to exist. She's like, I don't really agree with Hal, but I'm gonna not give up my own existence in this
Exactly.
moment. Obviously things change, like the battle proceeds. um but I love it. And also, can we just talk for a second, those blank white pages, what a brilliant show. How it's so well done. So well done. I find that brilliant. Just, we hit this emotional peak. We get the reveal of Parallax. We get these kind of, I have won and this is what I'm going to do. We go white, 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 the creation of something in green. And you get this really kind of sober voiceover of saying, I didn't go big enough. And here's what I'm going to do. And here's why it's right. And I think you can understand me, Steve, when I say, like, I got it, right? Like, it might not have been right. And I understand why the heroes had to fight against him, but it really felt like I was reading Hal Jordan. You know what I mean? Like, that felt to me Like Hal Jordan making the mistake of
You
being
remember
him.
all the pain that he went through and how it was so hard for him to grieve the fact that Mongol and Cyborg Superman just leveled Coast City beyond repair. And, even when he literally snapped and he's going towards Oa and he's killing Green Lanterns left and right to get to the Guardians, and he's taking their rings and he breaks Sinestro's neck. It's like he's doing horrible things, but I understand why he's doing it in the weird,
Yeah.
sickest way
Yes.
possible. For some strange reason, I don't want this guy to stop because he is in pain and no
Mhm.
one wants to help him.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah,
And that's the
and
part and that's the thing. I think that what the reader saw and felt in the pages of Emerald Twilight, I feel that Jurgens and Ordway brought those emotions of the fans out onto the pages,
yes.
especially through Oliver Queen.
Yes, and that's a major part we're going to be talking about here. This is my chance to plug. Steve and I had a really nice conversation about Emerald Twilight. If you haven't watched it and you're watching
It's
this,
in the
I
playlist.
recommend watching that because that's all Hal Jordan all the time. And watching our emotional distress. We watch Hal Jordan shed every bit of his heroism. But that's what was so wonderful about this moment in this story, was feeling like, if even if you don't call it heroism, it was that feeling that I was really reading Hal Jordan again and getting that space to understand the fall that I saw happen in Emerald Twilight taking place, what he did with it, why he has these powers now, what he hopes to accomplish with it. Um, and I was really, it all came together for me in this moment, which is why I say, if you're doing the super express route, there is no way you can do a road to Blackest Night while skipping this issue. Just
Absolutely.
all of this, immensely important. This is where most of it happens. Um, so what do we want to say about Oliver? Because
Well, the reason why Oliver Queen, aka Green Arrow, has such an important part of this story is also because of the history of Green Lantern and Green Arrow in the comics. Because there was a time in the late 70s when, and I believe it was Neil Adams and
mhm,
Denny O'Neil that took over the book, and they said, we gotta breathe some new life back into this Green Lantern book. So they decided to make it a Green Lantern, Green Arrow book. And they put these two characters into the comic book. They basically were like another Batman and Robin, but on a very different level and a very different style and topics of story. Like they did everything from topics about drug addictions to gang busting. Like they did street level stories
yeah,
with these guys. Very, very dark, very relatable stories. So there's a history between Hal and Oliver. And that's why Oliver believed that he was the one that had to deliver the final blow, because he believed he was the only one that had the strength and the heart to defeat him, because he knew, as much as of a friend that Hal is, he knew that this is not the Hal Jordan that he loves. I have to put this guy down once
yeah,
and for all, because he also knows Hal is in pain. He says, I'm gonna stop the pain.
yeah.
I'm gonna help you find your peace, friend. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, and I'm flipping through as we're talking about it, and I'm lingering on that page, and just the intensity of the exchange when Oliver makes peace with what he's about to do, and that they can't talk it out, and they just exchange each other's names, and he's no, and they look at each other, Oliver, Hal, and there's also this moment where Well, also the thing is, Kyle Rayner grabs him and says, like, "Wait, I've got him." Like you don't have to just. And Oliver knows he's made his peace with it. He's like, "No, I realize you're doing the quote unquote hero thing. You're restraining him. I'm making the decision for my friend that I don't think the rest of you, however you goody two shoes or heroes, whatever you want to call it,
And
he's making
that's
the hard decision that he feels only he can make."
And I'm glad you
It's
mentioned
tough.
that. I completely forgot that whole thing with Kyle because you can understand why Kyle is doing what he's doing, how he wants to
Right.
play the hero, because Kyle is green. He's the last of the Green Lanterns now. He is now standing in the presence of greatness. And he's like, I'm Green Lantern now. Alan Scott is now no longer going to be Green Lantern. If I can save this guy, maybe he can teach me a thing or two. Because
Yeah.
if this is supposed to be the greatest of the Green Lanterns, why do we kill him? Doesn't seem
Yeah.
right to me.
And it goes so far beyond even it's the depth of his moral character being
Yeah.
revealed in the moment, that like in the way that we have now seen Hal fall and now make these mistakes for a misguided sense of a greater good, even when we can understand parts of it, we then get the contrast of Kyle being our new ideal, being able to say, no, we're going to save everybody. Right. And Oliver takes that choice away, does things in his own hands. And it did need to be done. And I get it. It is what ended up saving existence as we know it. But I think it elevates our moral understanding of Kyle, which is actually important because of how Emerald Twilight ends and leads
Yeah.
into Green Lantern. This is not the goody two shoes Green Lantern that we knew and loved in the past. This is a guy who's a little bit of a loose cannon, or like he's having fun, like it's kind of thrown
Well,
on him, the mantle.
you
And
know,
this, but I feel like this moment you get to like kind of secure that goodness in him and believe that same thing
yeah,
of
you also
Kyle.
have to remember, I'm glad, I mean, it's not every Green Lantern was a straight arrow goody two shoes.
No.
We also have to remember, because I completely forgot, and we can't have this video about this story conclude without the fact that, let's not forget that Guy Gardner's in this story too,
Yes.
and he's just like, let's just kill this son of a bitch and get it
Yeah.
over with.
Guy Gardner,
That's why I
Guy
think
Gardner
that,
has a
I've
complete
always said
different.
that Kyle Rayner is
Yeah.
my favorite Green Lantern, but I'm not gonna lie about saying that I have such a soft spot for
Of
Guy
course.
Gardner. I
Of
love
course.
him.
Why not? Why not? Different characters. But it goes to show you what these different characters bring to the table with the
Yeah,
mantle, right? But what all I mean to say in this as a moment for Kyle is I do think it's an important moment to elevate our ideal of him, to start to have that trust and feel like he can fill that kind of real, like deeply good kind of role,
he still has a lot of growing to
inflappable.
do.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
has a lot of
Um,
growing to do, and he knows he still has more to learn, and he feels that this is one of his best ways. But then
and
again,
what a
the other question is, if he was able to save Hal, would he literally just say, "I'm done with this Green Lantern stuff. I don't want to do this anymore"? I don't necessarily feel that that's.
I don't
But then
know.
again, that's the beauty of alternate realities.
Yeah, and that's also the beauty of how it was written, in that we get to have Kyle's line cut off. Wait, I've got him. The idea is he's saying, wait, I've got him, as in don't kill him. I've already got him, like kind of good. He's probably wrong. The fight would probably go on. Who actually knows if Kyle is going to win in that moment? Because he's probably not going to.
Nope.
But I really think that's the beauty in the choice to cut off the line with it. I think it leaves us with being able to think all those good things, while like having some of the confusion of the moment like dusted away for us a little bit. And we get to both focus on the relationship between Oliver and Hal and the greatness of Kyle, and what it means for the stakes of the universe, the multiverse, and our story. Um, I love this. I made it very clear at the beginning. I love this issue. I have no problems with this issue.
Yeah.
This is great stuff.
Yeah.
This is peak comics here.
Yep. So of
Yeah.
course, you get the ending based on where you saw this climactic moment take place. You kind of get the ending that you expect, and everything apparently gets set right, which probably means that Wally West is back and he survived. I was because the truth of the matter
Mhm.
is I said earlier about those Zero issues. If you read the Flash Zero, you will basically get that part of Wally West's story. So don't fear not.
Mhm.
Wally West is fine. And that's
Right.
the most important thing. And that's the other interesting thing. I was actually a little surprised by the fact that they didn't make Wally's triumphant return in the comic books, because that's, I think, one of the few things that the reader will be left like, so what happened to the Flash? Is he actually dead?
I almost very casually made a joke that would have intensely spoiled Secret Wars. So I'm
Please don't. Secret Wars. We're
yeah.
like, okay, now
I
you're
know
gonna
it's
have to
the
tell
other
us to me
one.
when the cameras go off.
It's yeah, I almost very casually made a joke that would have deeply spoiled Secret Wars. I'm glad I didn't.
Good.
Um, but yeah, so you are right. Things kind of go back the way that we expect them to or hope they would, but we do have those moments like that, which perhaps will have ramifications nevertheless as we continue towards Blackest Night.
Yeah,
Even though he is
exactly.
back, who knows?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. So, you know, all in all, I'm definitely gonna agree with you. It's not the best story. I mean, like, it's not one of those, like, if you're gonna want to read a great story in DC that you want to just get back to that you haven't read in a long time,
This
Zero
isn't it.
Hour Crisis in Time is not on your radar.
No, no,
But
this
if
is not it.
you're if you're in a Blackest Night kind of mood and you want to really take some time and read the whole point A to point B story, this is one of those books you got to pick up. I mean, I will definitely say the thing I liked about this book was that there are no dull moments. It's very quick and easy reading. There's a lot of action. It's not as dialogue heavy as Crisis on Infinite Earths was.
Yes, that is
And again,
true.
I think it's a great book that fits the time that it was in.
Hmm.
So I will definitely say that this is not one of those books that's going to leave you bored. There's a lot
No,
of action, and
no, it moves
and
fast.
it's
You're
very
right. Like,
mile a minute.
yeah, it moves fast. You will not be bored by it. Is it one of the great DC stories? No. But it's really fun, it's really important, and as I think you can tell from how Steve and I are both talking about this, by the end there are those kind of emotional peaks that you hope to see in the great comics. But unlike other stories we have talked about that kind of work on their own, this one is one that really does kind of rely a little bit on some history with the characters and having done your homework ahead of time. There's no way that had I sat down and read this before doing Emerald Twilight that I would have come away from this story thinking anything close to what I do of how it ends up ending.
Yeah,
Um, so do with that what you will. Since comics are such a fun medium to do exactly what we're doing with this journey, if you want to judge it in the context of what we're doing, maybe it elevates this to like a 7 or 8 out of 10. But like it requires reading it like that. Luckily, with comics, you sometimes, as we are doing, find yourself reading it like that. So
right.
yeah.
All right. I think that's going to wrap this discussion up. Thanks again, Andy, for chatting with me. I hope you all enjoyed. So don't forget to leave a like or a comment. We'd love to talk to you about this. And feel free to subscribe, check our notification bell. I was talking with Andy just before we started to let the cameras roll. I'll get into it a little bit with you in further detail, Andy. Also spoke to another one of our colleagues, Cami, talking about how it's hard to really think about it, but this year has been a very good year for us here so far on That's Comical, because there's only 2 months left. But I am looking back at what we have done this year, and it didn't seem like a lot, really. But looking back at the amount of content that we've posted this year, we've covered a lot of great ground. And I think it's just because of the fact that we went into this year with a couple of project themes in mind. And I'm just happy to see that we're actually sticking with those projects. And I feel that that's the winning combination. I feel that that's why 2025, you're going to see me and Andy a lot because we still have an Ultimate Journey to finish. We're not done. We're far from over.
Yep.
So we're really excited for the next DC chapter. And the next time you see us for Ultimate Journey, we will be discussing another piece of the road to 2015 Secret Wars. And I'm just going to let you guys in on a small little sizzle here. It's going to be a good discussion next time because we got a really good story to cover this time. So in the meantime, everybody, thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next one.